From the far reaches of the Milky Way galaxy, it's Retro Nerd Girl with a film review for you. Today I'll be reviewing the movie Labyrinth, released in 1986, starring David Bowie, Jennifer Connelly, and Toby Froud. Directed by Jim Henson. The synopsis is a 16-year-old girl, Sarah, is given 13 hours to reverse her selfish wish for the Goblin King Jareth to take away her baby brother forever. The story. Most of us know who Jim Henson is, but on the off chance that you don't, Jim Henson was an incredible creator, an American puppeteer who created the Muppets back in 1955. They appeared in the television series Sam and Friends, late-night talk shows, in advertising, and on Sesame Street. Then he created the television show Fraggle Rock from 1983 to 1987. At the time, Jim wanted to veer away from Muppets by filming a movie featuring puppets with mature elements based on the conceptual artwork of English fantasy illustrator Brian Froud, well known for his 1978 book Fairies with Alan Lee. That movie was The Dark Crystal, released in 1982. One of my favorite movies that I'll eventually be reviewing in the future. Now let's stop for a second to oogle over the art of Brian Froud. As a child, I would spend hours and hours endlessly looking at his wonderful fantasy drawings, mixing man with nature, fairies, and folklore. I actually managed to still have the illustrated book for The Dark Crystal, The World of the Dark Crystal. And I'll tell you that the glue on that book is pretty much undone at the seams. I've been flipping through it so much over the years. Now, hot off the success of that movie, Jim and Brian decided to join forces again. At this point, he did not actually have a story in mind, but Jim threw around a few titles such as The Labyrinth, The Maze, The Labyrinth Twist, and The Tale of the Labyrinth. Brian Froud felt that the film should feature a baby and goblins, since it was common in old tales that goblins would steal babies, and he came up with an initial concept art piece. As well, whatever they came up with, Jim knew that he wanted the film to be more lighthearted and comedic than The Dark Crystal. The movie was very loosely based on Outside Over There, a children's book written and illustrated by Maurice Sendak in 1981, who was famous for the book Where the Wild Things Are, published in 1963. In the beginning of 1983, Jim Henson and Brian Froud met with children's author Dennis Lee, who wrote a novella for the project that was completed by the end of 1983. Monty Python's Terry Jones was brought in to write the film script based on the novella. However, Terry didn't really like the novella so much because it was a little too poetic. So he started from scratch using Brian Froud's concept drawings as inspiration for the screenplay. The draft wasn't quite it because Terry said that Jim really wanted something different than he wanted. Terry wanted the story to be more about people who are interested in manipulating the world than actually burying themselves at all. And that's totally different from what the story ended up being about. It turns out that once rock legend David Bowie was attached to play the villain in the film, Jareth, the Goblin King, Jim Henson asked Terry Jones to add in more scenes with him in it, and a few spots for him to sing songs. Terry really didn't agree with it, but he rewrote the script in spite of his feelings. About a year later, the script reappeared, redrafted by Laura Phillips, and afterwards George Lucas, who was a close friend of Jim Henson and also one of the executive producers on the film. Other contributors included Frank Oz, Bernie Brillstein, Brian Froud, Wendy Meidener, Lisa Henson, and Lawrence S. Merkin. After all that, David Bowie was given a script that he thought lacked the lighthearted comedy that he initially thought it would have, and had second thoughts about doing the film altogether. Jim then took the script back to Terry to insert his comedic flair without rewriting it. Then, Elaine May and Jim met prior to filming in 1985 to help humanize the characters a bit more, and the changes were added to the shooting script. In total, the script endured 25 treatments between 1983 and 1985. Now, one thing I found very delightful about the story is that after having so many cooks in the kitchen, the finished product was seemingly dumb and silly and a bunch of ideas that were just smashed together in a messy spectacle. But actually, the story is brilliant and very well thought out, in my opinion. It's one of those films that actually fool you into thinking that it's a weird children's film with lots of oddities, but it's actually much deeper than you could ever have originally imagined. So on the surface, it feels like The Muppets meets The Dark Crystal with your guest star appearance musical number. You know what I mean. On The Muppets, you'd get a celebrity surrounded by Muppets singing a song or two. However, we get this interesting story that blends the psychological journey of The Wizard of Oz, Alice in Wonderland, Cinderella, Snow White, and Peter Pan, while using fairy tale imagery to teach valuable life lessons. Oh yes, I love the story. And as I get deeper into the review, you'll know exactly why I think this is brilliant. Now the pacing. At an hour and 41 minutes, the pacing is very uneven and the runtime is a little long. I don't mind it so much because the details are the little ideas that support the fantasy and I'm completely here for it. And in fact, I really could have used a few more minutes to really flush out some of the ideas that are definitely presently there. It just needed a little coaxing so it could be really obvious what's going on in the film. Now the challenge. The challenge in the film was Jareth the Goblin King. Sarah, the protagonist in the film, makes a terrible wish to have goblins take away her baby brother, Toby. Her wish is granted and Jareth appears to her and tells her that if she wants to reverse the wish, she has to complete his magical labyrinth within 13 hours or her brother will be turned into a goblin permanently. Now, right off the bat, I want to address the biggest critique of the film, which is the fact that Jareth is played by David Bowie, who was 39 during the filming of the movie, and Sarah is only 16 according to the film. Now, technically, the actress playing her, Jennifer Connelly, was 14 while shooting the film. Because of the romantic overtones, it seems a bit creepy to pair these two together as a couple. In this film, Jareth is not a goblin but a man that would be a mythical creature that could be thousands of years old, or maybe even 0 years old, created and plucked right out of Sarah's imagination. It's more obvious in earlier drafts of the screenplay, where it was explicitly explained that Jareth was an ideal man that Sarah subconsciously conjured up from some pictures of a handsome man in a newspaper. In Sarah's room, you can see a figurine of Jareth on the right-hand side of her desk, and newspaper clippings of Sarah's famous actress mom, who has been in an off and on again relationship with a man that has Jareth's face. This doesn't necessarily mean that Sarah is in love with her mother's boyfriend, but instead, you can see how much she loves her mom and idolizes her. Her mom's boyfriend's image is just a stand-in for her Prince Charming until she can find one in the real world for herself. It's much more innocent than you would assume. So the determination about Jareth is that Jareth and the owl that appears in the beginning of the film are the same entity. The second thing is that there's a possibility that the owl is just a regular owl that Sarah uses as an anchor to create Jareth and the labyrinth in her mind. Now, the other scenario is that Jareth is a real magical, mythical creature that falls in love with Sarah while in the form of the owl in the beginning of the film that can create worlds and can change his appearance for her. And I really like these ideas. And the very end of the film, the owl flies far away, possibly to visit some other child or person who is overly romantic about fantasy. Another possibility is that the owl is a magical guardian, leading Sarah through this imaginary journey to teach her the life lessons she learns in the film. And the fifth possibility is that the owl is a malefic creature that tries to lead Sarah astray. And that's what I love about this story. Jareth alone can be interpreted in so many ways. There are some theories that since Jareth is a human, perhaps he was stolen as a baby, and then he was adopted by the former king of goblins, and was never transformed into a goblin. And this is totally possible. But again, it's very clear to me that his appearance in this form is the creation of Sarah's imagination. Now, one interesting detail to help us single out Jareth's origin is that when Sarah sees him, she does not tell him anything about, hey, you look familiar, or I've seen you somewhere before, don't I? Know you? She just knows who he is instantly. And like Dorothy in The Wizard of Oz, she appropriates people and things from her real world into her fantasy. Jareth represents Sarah's temptation. At one point, he even throws a snake at Sarah, hearkening to the snake of temptation in the Garden of Eden. Jareth is the white rabbit from Alice in Wonderland who leads the protagonist into the strange world of the labyrinth. Jareth exists to do exactly what Sarah wants and honor her wish. It seems to actually break his heart that he can't do that for her, even though she has changed her mind. He offers her the gift of going back to her own bubble in her room and play with her toys and costumes to forget about Toby. This is everything that she asked for, but her conscience won't let her do it. Now, there's more information about Jareth that I want to bring up later on when I talk about Sarah. He offers her a chance to make it through his labyrinth, to trap her in his world forever. In this offer he makes with Sarah, he gains 2 subjects to rule over instead of just 1. Like the Wicked Witch in The Wizard of Oz, Jareth keeps popping up every once in a while to terrorize the protagonist and even uses a crystal ball to spy on her, just like the Wicked Witch did. And I love these connections so much, and there are so many of them in this film. The labyrinth itself is another one of Sarah's appropriations, being that it was a wooden maze game in her room on her dresser. It's Jareth's pride and joy, set up for entrapment, stuffed with so many riddles, puzzles, and temptations. This is how he traps people there to become his subjects. And you kind of look at all of the people that you see in the labyrinth as people who have been sort of suckered into Jareth's illusions, and now they're trapped there forever. The Fire Gang is one of them. They tried to recruit Sarah into this reckless lifestyle. And there's a junk lady who tries to trap Sarah in her own nostalgia. I mean, that scene is like my favorite, and that lady, she almost got me too. I was like, oh my gosh, what is she doing? Now, Terry Jones said that he felt that Jareth was actually using the labyrinth to keep people from getting to his heart. And it actually makes sense in the story. So when Sarah actually completes the labyrinth, she actually reaches his heart. And this is why he sings a sad love song when she reaches the castle. He's brokenhearted that she won't accept his gifts and the world he created for her. His storyline is so sad and tragic in a way. And it seems as if he can't live within her, in her imagination. And that is what he says to her at the end. I enjoyed Jareth so very much as a melodramatic romantic with a flair for moody dramatics. In many ways, he really reminds me of Peter Pan, the leader of the Lost Boys. The goblins being the Lost Boys. Think of it. Imagine all of those goblins once being a child that was stolen. Very, very deep. Now, physically, there's even a few striking similarities to Peter Pan, like his tights and his eyebrows. Like Peter Pan, who tempts Wendy into Neverland, Jareth tempts Sarah into the Labyrinth. Anytime he's on screen, it's a spectacular moment, and you can't take your eyes off of him. He's a true highlight of the film. Another challenge in the film is the emphasis on time. Like the White Rabbit, Jareth keeps track of the time, and the ticking time clock helps us to have some tension for the characters. The empathy. There's so many facets of this movie to really get nerdy on, so I hope you'll indulge me as I get into a bit of the play-by-play on the details. Sarah is a tough character to like, especially in the beginning. The story starts out with Sarah, a loner kid who practices reciting lines from a book alone in a local park in full period costume with her dog Merlin as an owl looks on. We know that eventually the owl will turn into Jareth. Her lines are, "Through dangers untold and hardships unnumbered, I have fought my way to the castle beyond the Goblin City to take back the child that you have stolen. My will is as strong as yours, and my kingdom is as great. You have no power over me." In particular, the line, "You have no power over me," is the line that she keeps forgetting. And it is a self-empowering statement. You could apply to just about anything. But the entire verse she is reciting is an actual preview of what is to happen in the movie. So that when she says it again at the end, these things have actually transpired in the story and not empty words as they feel in the beginning of the film. After getting home late from the park, she gets into an argument with her stepmother, who she totally flips out on. Her stepmom mentions that no matter what she does, Sarah treats her like a fairy tale stepmother. In Sarah's mind, she is Cinderella. And this will come up throughout the storyline, throughout the film. Even though she just isn't. She isn't Cinderella at all. She's actually quite privileged. And you can see that her stepmom is really concerned for her, even encouraging her to go out on dates. And maybe that's part of the problem too. Sarah may be feeling pressure to grow up faster than what she'd like. She begrudges the attention Toby, her 2-year-old brother, gets and hates having the responsibility of having to look after him, as if he is a terrible burden on her and she is a slave to her parents. She totally flips out again when she realizes that one of her many exhibited stuffed animals, a teddy bear by the name of Lancelot, has been given to her brother to play with. I mean, she loses it completely, and it's a total no wire hangers moment, and instantly the audience hates her for being such a ridiculous spoiled brat. She's out of control. As Sarah is raving about how much she wants to be taken away from her terrible life, she starts inventing a story of how she is a Cinderella-type character and says that what no one knew is that the king of the goblins had fallen in love with the girl. So we aren't imagining that Jareth is in love with Sarah because she specifically wanted Jareth to be in love with her. It's a common fantasy of having a royal suitor. Nearly every fairy tale has it, and Cinderella is an excellent example of that. She awakens the goblins by telling her make-believe story, and specifically says that the girl in her story called upon the goblins for help. And I'm mentioning all of this because I want to make a point that this is further proof that Sarah is creating the world of the Labyrinth on the spot. She's doing this. When she wishes for the goblins to take Toby away, she instantly regrets it. when she realizes that it really happened. Her subconscious humanity kicks in, and I think that's what brings this fantasy world to the surface. Jareth often mentions more than once that he turned the world upside down for her, bringing the fantasy world to the surface. I also mentioned before that many aspects of her adventure appear in her room, and her room is a fascinating place where we learn about the film's literary influences and a bit more about Sarah. Her room is so much fun and filled with so many Easter eggs and interesting details. In the film, the first character she meets in the labyrinth is Hoggle, who is part goblin and part dwarf. He appears in Sarah's room as a bookend. He represents Sarah's personality trait of pessimism, cowardice, selfishness, and greed. Jareth uses him unwillingly to trick Sarah, and it's important to note that on the back of his jacket it features a face, letting us know that he is two-faced and should not be trusted. However, by the end, she makes friends with him, making peace with that part of herself. Next, she meets Ludo, and he's my favorite. He's a big monster with horns that kind of looks like Sully from Monsters, Inc., released in 2001, that is very gentle and very sweet. I mean, you just want to give him a big hug. And he actually appears as a doll in Sarah's room. He can control rocks, so he represents Sarah's inner strength, loyalty, and grounding spirit. In fact, when she meets him, it's no mistake that his feet are not on the ground, as he hangs upside down, meaning that she needed to get grounded. In Sarah's room, there's a stuffed animal that looks just like Sir Didymus with an eye patch on her dresser, who is actually the next character that she meets, which is her bravery, her valor, and bravado. He's a little bit like I guess he's a terrier, but he's like a miniature one, kind of like a chihuahua that just barks really loud. He means well, and he is a pretty good fighter and very hilarious, by the way. But his bark is much bigger than his bite. Most of these characters are just so cute, and Sir Didymus is probably a direct result of Terry Jones's influence because the character carries on much of that classic Monty Python British humor, and he's a true treat. His steed is actually another dog, so it's a dog-on-dog kind of, I guess, joke you can say. And Ambrose looks just like Sarah's real-life dog, Merlin. And this is about the time that Sarah becomes more likable as she displays kindness towards her new friends, and she begins to display a little bit more intelligence as she walks through the labyrinth. Once the whole crew gets together, it's not too hard to see Dorothy and her friends traveling to the Emerald City and Sarah and her friends traveling to the Goblin City. The protagonist has brought together aspects of her personality to face off with her enemy, and in this case, Sarah's enemy is the temptation to ignore her responsibility for taking care of her brother and losing herself in her childhood fairy tales. Jareth tries to give Sarah her dreams. One of them is revealed in a beautiful music box in her room, where there is a doll that's dressed up like Cinderella, dancing. So pretty. There's a beautiful scene in the film where Sarah is the belle of a Cinderella-esque masquerade ball, and her Goblin King dances with her. She rejects it, bursting her own bubble of false dreams, realizing that it's a prison. My favorite sequence is where this is revealed more, when Sarah ends up in the Labyrinth's version of her room. A junk lady keeps giving her things from her childhood that hold strong memories. I feel as if that junk lady is like a version of the Queen of Hearts, taken more literally this time, as she uses sentiment to get to Sarah. And Sarah at first really starts to transform into another version of this woman. Another trap for her has been set, but she rejects it because she realizes that she doesn't really need those things at the moment. She needs to be responsible. They were once useful, but now they've become a trap to keep her from growing. Wow, what a revelation. And this is directly dealing with her issue that she had with Toby at the beginning of the film, playing with her toys. She's not a baby anymore, and although it's nice to have the toy, she doesn't need it. Toby could use it now. So she grows to the point of actually giving Lancelot to the sweet sleeping babe at the end of the movie. She's growing up and learning how to let go of the things that no longer serve her. This is one of the reasons why I just love this movie so much. You have to forgive me as I just go crazy loving this movie. Just loving this movie. At the end of the film, she puts a few items away in her drawer. And I noticed that she didn't throw them away. Among the items is the book that she was reciting lines from in the beginning of the film. At first I thought she was a theater kid practicing for a play, but this proves she's actually just doing this all on her own. She's practicing in the park, and it's all something that she wants to do for her own fancy. It's her favorite book, and she's breaking free of its spell over her. Now, some critics had a problem with the end scene when Sarah's friends from the Labyrinth appear in her room, right after she makes the decision to put aside childish things. They thought that it undid all of the progress that she made. However, to me, I thought that it meant that she can still use her imagination at any time. She can always be a kid at heart while still being more mindful and responsible. And of course, since I'm a big crybaby, I just sobbed. It's such a good story. I just love this stuff. As well, there are several other lessons that Sarah learns, like don't take things for granted. Nothing is what it seems, and life is not always fair. Now the technical aspects. The shooting began in April and ended in September of 1995. 5 months is a little long for a shoot after preparing for it for over a year and a half. Really due to having so many puppets and animatronic creatures that needed to be modified on the spot. The costumes were based on Brian Froud's incredible drawings, and the most magnificent costumes were given to Jareth. The inspiration came from Grimm's fairy tales, Japanese kabuki theater, and Marlon Brando's jacket from The Wild One, released in 1953. Now, no comment on the tights, but you gotta love the lapels on that jacket, though. The wig that was used had spiky hairs cut short with random longer sprigs throughout. And I love that look. It's not quite a rock and roll hairdo that's teased up, but it's really more stylistic. My favorite costume that he wears is the last one, where he is embodying the owl. You can see the bird-like shoulder bones sticking up from the soft, feathery jacket that he wears. The whole scene is so very creative because it looks as if the magic is wearing off and the owl can no longer create the full fantasy for her. I mean, you can see even his character, his makeup is very subdued, and he even has bags under his eyes. So he's tired. He even says, "I'm exhausted of living up to your expectations," as he's talking to Sarah. And, you know, he has a very somber look as if the illusion is wearing off, and I just loved it so much. It makes that scene so much more powerful as I've come to understand it over the years. Now, Jareth offers Sarah dreams in the form of crystal balls he magically rotates in his hands throughout the film. That was such a nice touch to let us know that this is a truly magical character. The effect was done by having choreographer Michael Motion crouched behind David Bowie's back and replacing David's right arm with his own arm while he blindly enacted his routine. That was absolutely incredible, and it's a genius way to pull off that incredible effect. I remember seeing this for the very first time thinking that it was indeed David Bowie pulling off this stunt. Now let's talk about the main showcase of the film, the puppets. I can't tell you how much I love puppets, and I love these puppets. They're, not glamorous at all. They're very grungy and dirty, but I really admire the art that has to go into creating each one, and I also admire all of the talent and the work that goes into each and every little puppet featured in the film. It's just amazing, the work that is on display in this movie. And at one point during the magic dance scene, there were over 48 puppets and 8 people in goblin costumes in the scene. Now, the first puppet I want to kind of single out and want to talk about is Hoggle. The concept for this puppet of him being part goblin, part dwarf was brilliant because this was a chance to bridge humanity into the puppetry. The physical performance of the body was wonderfully played by Shari Weiser, who was also given enlarged robotic hands to match the character. Hoggle's face was radio controlled by 4 puppeteers and to coordinate the facial expressions with Shari's movements. Brian Henson was one of them as well, who not only controlled the mouthpiece and a few other facial movements, but gave an excellent, heartfelt vocal performance. The result was an incredible character which took several weeks of practice and coordination to pull off. And can you believe this? The costume for Hoggle got lost in travel somehow and ended up in an unclaimed baggage claim, where it has stayed ever since. 2 puppeteers split the performance for Ludo because the rig was over 70 pounds. Initially it was 100 pounds, but redesigned to help relieve the weight as much as possible. A miniature video camera in the right horn fed a small television monitor inside the puppet's stomach, where the puppeteers inside could see what was going on. There's something too about Ludo that seems so real, or maybe it's just that I wish he was real, as sweet as he is. In order to keep things coordinated, choreographers are often brought in, and one such crew member was Cheryl McFadden, most famously known for playing the role of Dr. Beverly Crusher under the name Gates McFadden on Star Trek: The Next Generation. One scene I absolutely loved that she choreographed was the ballroom scene. It was one of the very few scenes without puppets and was said to be one of the easiest shots to film. They especially made the scene look like a young girl's Cinderella fantasy, but the masquerade ball was the element that gave it a nightmarish twist. This drives home the message that nothing is what it seems. Jareth is all-powerful in the Labyrinth, so much so that he sees everything and knows everything that goes on in it. You can see hidden faces of Jareth throughout the scenes in the Labyrinth, and to support that, he even speaks like a god as he urges Hoggle not to throw away a poisoned peach from beyond. And by the way, that poisoned peach is much like Snow White's poisoned apple. One incredibly striking scene in the film is during the Etcher scene, which is inspired by replicating a piece of art hung in Sarah's room. The piece is called Relativity, which depicts a world that defies the laws of gravity, printed in 1953. It is a lithograph print by the Dutch graphic artist M.C. Etcher, who made mathematically inspired works of art. The way it's used in the film shows off the fantasy world that Jareth has created for Sarah, defying gravity, as he keeps saying over and over that he has turned the world upside down for her. Again, I just love the themes throughout this film and how it all sort of plays together quite nicely. The set was built, but the work to create the illusions in the scene were mostly done in camera and a few rigs, but mainly done with editing, such as flipping the footage to create an anti-gravity and reversing the film to create the scene where Toby catches one of Jareth's orbs. Now I'm going to mention the fire gang scene because it is the most criticized scene in the film, and it's pretty obvious why. At the time, black screen was used instead of green screen, putting all of the puppeteers in black, while a picture of the forest was used for the background as an overlay, and it didn't work. And Jim Henson was not very happy with the results either, but he thought it was important to keep the scene in the film. Now, one scene that I feel gets unfairly criticized is the digital owl that appears in the opening credits. And I don't think it was meant to fool anyone into thinking that it was a real bird. It's a fantasy bird. And it is the very first attempt at a CGI animal character in a feature film. I think it looked awesome for 1986, and I must commend the film for introducing the first CGI character to the world. I can appreciate the many hours of dedication it took to do it, knowing firsthand how computing worked in the 1980s. It was in its infancy compared to what we can do now. So if you think of it, in order to get to a character like Thanos from the Marvel franchise, we had to get here. So I respect it. I must also commend the film on the creative sets and matte paintings that were used to create this fantasy plane, if you will. It was not really meant to look realistic because it's a girl's fantasy place that is covered in glitter. And I loved it because that glitter is a very distinct detail that no place would exist like this, you know. And the sky, it was very static and sometimes has a very odd combination of colors because it's an illusion. It's a fantasy that Jareth is creating for Sarah. Jareth has a lot of power, but he can't recreate planet Earth. And it's in the details that you would think make the film imperfect, but it fits in just perfectly. Trevor Jones did the score consisting of 6 tracks: Into the Labyrinth, Sarah, Hallucination, The Goblin Battle, 13 O'Clock, and Home at Last. You know, it doesn't get enough credit, and I think it's because it's understated, but I think it's also very gorgeous. It's synth-heavy with wonderful orchestral notes featuring fairy tale melodies. David Bowie wrote 5 original songs for the film, which provided some of the most memorable moments in the film, making the film a musical. Underground, Magic Dance, Chilly Down, As the World Falls, and Within You. He made music videos for Underground, which can be heard in the opening and the final credits. And As the World Falls Down is the other music video, which is my personal favorite. Now, I remember seeing the video for As the World Falls Down on MTV back in the 80s, and it was not the official video. The official video looked completely different. The version that I saw was simply the fantasy ball scene in full that was cut specifically for MTV. For the song Underground, he incorporated a lot of blues and gospel sounds, featuring the voices of Chaka Khan, Cissy Houston, and Luther Vandross for his backup. Of all the songs, though, many people just love the Magic Dance song and that entire sequence as well, which I must admit is so much to see. He has so much energy in that scene. Choreographer Charles August was brought in to help David with his dance movements, and it really paid off to insert a lot of dynamics and fun into that moment in time in the film. Now, the performances of the contenders to play Jareth were Michael Jackson, Prince, Mick Jagger, and Sting. However, Jim Henson's kids convinced him that David Bowie was coming off of his 1983 hit album, Let's Dance, and was perfect for the role. Henson met with David Bowie that year and kept him in the loop of everything that was going on for years. Finally, February of 1985, just 2 months before filming, David officially signed on to the project. The biggest draw for him was being involved in the music writing aspect for the movie. as well as his desire to be in a children's film. I really enjoyed David Bowie so much in this. He's no stranger to odd costumes and wearing it with such ownership. Throughout his career, he's embraced makeup and fashions to create characters for his music. And he's definitely not the first guy to wear makeup, but he had a way of doing things in his career that were iconic. And this role in particular is no exception. He was no stranger to acting either, playing interesting and challenging roles in such movies as The Man Who Fell to Earth in 1976 and The Hunger in 1983. One other thing I liked about his performance is how much he gave Jareth a personality different from his own or anything I had ever seen in any of his other films. Jareth is the villain in the film, but he's also a likable, tragic character that is often misunderstood. Now, 16-year-old Sarah was played by 14-year-old actress Jennifer Connelly during the time of filming. This totally blows my mind because she looks a little bit older than what she is. In some places looks a lot older. But just listening to her in her interviews that she did during the time she was promoting this movie, she's so mature and well-spoken for her age with a good knowledge of what was expected of her on set. It's impossible not to admire her work ethic and her grown-up sensibility, especially looking at all of the stunts she actually is doing in the film. And I don't think she gets enough credit for playing Sarah because, in my opinion, she felt as if she knew her character well and gave her specific nuances. There are times when she's acting like she's acting, and it seems a bit stiff. If you don't understand that Sarah is obsessed with being a make-believe character and being part of a fantasy, so her whole air is about being a princess or being part of something that's like a play in real life, then you understand for sure why she acts the way she does. Sarah is not practicing for a school play. She's just doing all of this on her own. And I felt that Jennifer really nailed that detail. The baby who played Toby was Toby Froud, son of Brian Froud. Babies can't act, okay? But you can catch moments of their moods and create a performance from that. I love the scenes where Toby is smiling and being really cute, but it's very difficult to watch him cry in many scenes where he is. With his mom and dad close by, Toby was never really in any danger. So we don't really have to worry about that. The scene where Toby is surrounded by puppets and crying, one would have thought that that would scar poor Toby for life from puppets. But on the contrary, Toby went into the family business because his mom is Wendy Froud, a puppet maker and sculptor. He has worked on Hollywood projects since 2005, such as The Chronicles of Narnia, The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, Kubo and the Two Strings in 2016, and even worked with his parents on The Dark Crystal: Age of Resistance, the TV series that appeared in 2019 as its design supervisor for 10 episodes. Isn't that cool? You go, Toby! Now, the enjoyment. Labyrinth had a great deal of publicity to promote the film, including a television special and computer games, lots of interviews, and however, for whatever reason, it failed at the box office. I'm not sure what it was, and maybe it was because audiences had grown out of the fantasy genre and, you know, they were really hot in 1983, but it took so long to get the film made, and when it was finally released, people had lost their interest in fantasy. Myself included, I wanted to see the film when it came out, but going to the movies really depended on my mom, and she was the one who would take me to the movies. So I don't think this was something that she was interested in, and I think, if I can recall this correctly, she had stopped taking us to the movies as much by about 1985. I think 1984, there were so many really good movies. By 1985, it was like, okay, we can we cannot see every single movie that comes out in theaters. So I think that was it. My mom and I both love The Dark Crystal so much. It's a movie that the entire family loved, you know, and so we really bonded over The Dark Crystal. But I guess we took it for granted that Jim Henson was going to make a lot more movies, and we'd watch this one on cable possibly. And sadly, this was Jim Henson's last movie, and he passed away in 1990. I actually didn't catch the movie on cable, but I always kept catching the last part of it on like late night TV over the years. And I only really just saw this movie in 2012 and loved it. Why did I wait so long to see this? Oh my God, I don't understand. But I just love the style of this film and the message, and everything about this movie is totally for me. I see it as a pure masterpiece that I just enjoy watching all the time. You could just put this movie on loop for the whole day and I'll watch it each time. Now, over the years and through the decades, people have been wising up to this awesome movie. And I've been hearing from so many people that they feel as if this is their favorite film ever, period. I can totally see why. It's almost my favorite, you know. Terminator is my favorite movie, but this one, it's, you know, it's really up there. The message is so great. And, you know, come on, Jareth is the perfect character for cosplaying if you want to get the most attention at any event, you know. Just show up in a Jareth costume, man or woman, and you will be the, you know, the star that everyone looks at. Revisiting this movie over the years has been a true pleasure, and I seem to discover a new, wonderful detail to oogle over every single time. It's just that much fun and very, like, again, filled with symbolism that I absolutely love in movies. I love this wonderful adventure of massive personal growth that Sarah experiences, learning not to take things for granted. Nothing is what it seems, and life is not always fair. She makes peace with her pessimism, cowardice, selfishness, and greed. She taps into her inner strength and gets grounded. She aligns herself with her bravery, valor, and bravado. She brought together these aspects of her being to face off with the temptation to ignore her responsibility and losing herself in her own bubble of false dreams, realizing it's a prison. She has learned to let go of things that no longer serve her, and she can always be a kid at heart while being more mindful and responsible. Just cancel that self-help seminar that you just scheduled and go watch The Labyrinth, okay? My rating is a 9.5. Well, that sums up my review. I hoped you liked it. If you did, I've got over 100 of these videos, so go on and browse the channel and see more reviews from me just like this. Subscribe if you haven't done so already, and hit the bell icon to be the very first to be notified of my next video. This is Retro Nerd Girl signing off. Take care, movie lovers. I'm off to my next review.